Hello, everyone. It's indeed a real pleasure for Kathy and I to be with you again today after being gone for, well, I guess it was August that we left this last time. But it's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor, and we don't take that lightly. We love you. And we miss you a lot. And it's been a real blessing for us to be here this week and just to be able to get another grasp of what's going on. And we came over, we were telling people in the States we're coming over to go encourage everyone. You know what? It's the other way around. We have been so encouraged by being here. Thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness. Job. I am going to be preaching on Job today. The entire book. 42 chapters. 42 chapters, but don't worry, no more than 5 minutes each. I'm joking, not even that. I don't normally try to preach like that, but I felt a personal need recently to study this book more fully. I've said it in the past that God does not promise us a life of happiness with no troubles. But on the contrary, I can confirm what the Apostle Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 3. All who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. What Paul is saying here is that there is a problem in this world with evil, with pain. And there have been books that have been written about that, the problem of pain. The persecution can come in various forms, sometimes very subtle, and other times it's very blatant. Persecution can be anything that attempts to keep us from living a godly life. This can be economic difficulties, family challenges, or health struggles. And these things can happen to you or to someone who is close to you. I've been in contact with many people recently who are going through some of these things right now. There's a lot of suffering and pain going on around the world. Many people don't have just one challenge they're facing, but they're dealing with a multitude of things all at once. Their country gets attacked overnight. Their car is wrecked. Their house floods. They get sick, really sick. They lose money in some type of investment. They have a family member who turns against them. And I could go on. I've been drawn to the book of Job because here is the story of a man who had all of these things happen to him in a very short period of time. And to make things worse, it seems at first glance that Job was really an innocent person in all of this. So it would seem logical to me that Job would help me to understand this problem. But before we jump into the book of Job, I would like us to read about soil, dirt. The reason that I want to start with this is because it's actually one of my applications for the end of the sermon. And in case I don't get there, I want to get there now. It's important for us to have this in mind while we are looking at Job. So from Luke's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 4 to 8. And when a great crowd was gathering, and people from town after town came to him, he said in a parable, a sower went out to sow his seed. And as he sowed, some fell along the path and was trampled underfoot, and the birds of the air devoured it. And some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered away because it had no moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and choked it. And some fell into good soil and grew and yielded 100-fold. As he said these things, he called out, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Father, we have ears. let us hear your word. Amen. Training. Training is vitally important. When someone joins one of the branches of the military, what is the first thing that they do? They go through basic training. When someone is playing sports, they spend hours doing nothing but practicing. When a surgeon is learning, they have to spend years studying and then they watch someone. First aid responders have to practice and take classes and prepare. Training is important because when the real event happens, you want to be ready as possible so that your instincts kick in. Each one of us is like soil in the passage you just read. We each have the capacity to produce a harvest. We each receive seeds that are planted. Our goal is to produce a harvest, but our soil needs preparation. Some soil is hard, it gets walked on. Some is rocky. Some is full of weeds. To prepare the soil takes work, and that is important to be done before the seed is planted. That is our responsibility. The book of Job talks very much about this issue. Like I said earlier, Job has 42 chapters, but don't worry, we're not going in depth. Job is basically a book of Hebrew poetry with 2 chapters of narrative that introduce the book and then 1 more chapter of narrative that ends the book. And in between those 3 chapters is poetry. Chuck Swindoll has an outline and it's up on your screen here. And it's a little hard for you to see, but this is a pretty good outline. You can see all the different columns, but basically the first column is chapters 1 and 2. And that's the first part. And then basically almost all the way to the end, you have the middle portion, which is the explanation of suffering. What is suffering? The explanation. Why is it happening? All in poetry. Poesy. And then we come to the very end. Chapter 38 and on, God actually speaks. And so it is fascinating, and we're going to get there. But in order for us to do that, I want us to spend, I'll just send this slide to whoever wants it. Okay, what's your? No, I'll do it afterwards. Okay, but I want us to read the first 2 chapters, and I've asked Doug to read this for me because by the time that if I would do it, you would get tired of my voice and all that. And I've asked Doug to read it quickly because it's a lot. And so Doug is going to read this. He's going to read it quickly. Please follow along with your pew Bible that's right there. I think it's 417, page 417. Or if you have your phone, you can go there, Job chapter 1. Follow it along. Remember, I'm not the new tech type of person. I'm the old guy. We do this old-fashioned. We have the written, okay? And so please turn in there with me and follow along as Doug reads us. Doug.
Okay, hold on to your seats. Here we go. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of their feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered to the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another, and he said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job rose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women who speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this Job did not sin with his lips. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Suphite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to him with sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. For they saw that he was suffering. His suffering was very great.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Doug. There's so much here. When I read these chapters, what strikes me is that Job was a godly man. It says that he was blameless and upright. He feared God and turned away from evil. We also see that God had blessed him with a big family, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And added to this, Job was very rich. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and many servants. All of this together made him a very important man, so that he was considered, as it says here, to be the greatest of all of the people of the East. We would say that Job was truly blessed. Blessed with a quiver full of children. Blessed economically, way beyond what was needed to live a decent life. He was at the top of all social levels. Most people of this world are people of justice. We like to think that good things will happen to good people and bad things will happen to bad people. We may say that we don't believe in karma, but in many ways we do. And I will readily admit that if you read biblical wisdom literature, like the book of Proverbs, it presents itself in a karma truth manner. The book of Proverbs is full of verses that say if you do such and such, you will be blessed, or you can expect this type of result. Such as the verse that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. But biblical wisdom literature means that what is said is often true. In fact, it's usually true, but it's not to be taken as a promise. There can be and will be exceptions. This means that your child may decide to go their own way when they grow up. But getting back to Job, verse 6, chapter 1. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and from on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. And you know the rest of the story. Satan tells God that the reason Job is blameless and upright is because God is protecting him and not letting anything bad happen to him. So God wants to prove that Satan is wrong and tells Satan that he can go and do whatever he wants with Job's things. So Satan goes out to prove to God that Job is only being blameless and upright because of God's protection. What happens next is terrible. Within a very short time, Job's oxen, donkeys, sheep, and cattle are all stolen by foreigners, who also kill all of Job's servants except for the ones who escaped to tell Job. Then right after Job hears this news, while it's still happening, the final servant comes in who tells him that all of his children were just killed because a wind fell on their house, caused their house to crush them, and he was the only one left. Job's response to this news is amazing. He stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshiped God. He said in verse 21, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. How do we react when bad things happen to us? When the thorns start to grow, when rocks are thrown onto our fields, when people walk all over us, hardening our soil. In all this, Job did not sin. Chapter 2 starts with a very similar situation. How much time has passed between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2? We don't know, but not very long. Verse 1, chapter 2. Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin? All that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life. Satan then leaves and does what he does. He attacks people's belief in any way he can, ruining people economically, wrecking family conditions, and now crippling one's health. Job is stricken with some disease that we really can't identify here. He has loathsome sores all over his body. Reading more in the following chapters, we're told that he had severe itching, insomnia, running sores, and scabs. He had nightmares and bad breath and weight loss and chills and fever and diarrhea and blackened skin. All that from the next chapters. In fact, when his friends show up, they did not even recognize him at first. Job had really lost a lot. His wealth was all gone. All his livestock with which to make money was gone, taken away. His servants were all gone except 4 or 5 of them. But we read later in the later chapters that they also stopped listening to him. His children had been killed in a terrible accident. I don't think that we can really relate to this loss. Losing a child is one of the most terrible things that you can imagine. But can you imagine losing 10 all at once? And then you are struck with some disease where you have pain and you cannot get comfortable. No ibuprofen or Tylenol will help at all. You are oozing pus, sitting in ashes. You are stinking, literally, and your skin is burning. It's turning colors. Could it possibly get worse? Yes, it could. Job's wife, who had also lost her children and who had also lost her wealth and her standing in society, comes up to Job and says, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." This is exactly what Satan wanted Job to do. Job's wife probably did not know this, but she was being used as a tool by Satan. How does Job respond? Verse 10, chapter 2. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from bad, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This book is not about Job's wife, so I'm not going to comment on that. There are 2 things that Job was not willing to give up: his faith in God and his integrity. That is what his wife asked him to do. Thankfully, Job realized this right away and responded with correct theology. In times of severe testing, our first question should not be, "How can I get out of this?" But it should be, "What can I get out of this?" Next on the scene arrived Job's friends. They had heard of all the evil that had come upon Job, and they arranged to come and to show Job some sympathy and to comfort him. The best way to help people who are hurting is to just be with them, saying little or nothing at all. You just need to be there, letting them know that you care. For 7 days, Job's friends did this. And then the speaking starts. One wonders, could things start to get better now? No. For the next 38 chapters, we have Hebrew poetry with Job, his 3 older friends, and then 1 younger friend, and God all speaking. This is long. It is hard reading, but it is deep and full of passion. And in order to really understand the situation, you have to take your time and meditate through these chapters when you get home. Chapter 3, Job speaks. He doesn't curse God, but he curses the day of his birth and the night of his conception. Job cries out, "Why was I born? It would have been better if I had died at birth. This is too much for me to handle." Job's cries show someone in deep anguish. What he has experienced is way beyond what most people have faced. There is a genuine reason for his despair. And when we are in the presence of people who have faced even part of these issues, we need to give them some slack. Job is not wanting to write off God, but he's wanting to argue with him, to try to understand why this has happened to him. Job really believes that God exists and that he is powerful and good. But Job is confused and doesn't know why this has happened to him, an innocent man. He is agonizing over the situation. Job's friends don't understand at all Job's words. They believe that Job has actually attacked God, and so they want to defend God. And in the following chapters, we have 3 rounds of discussions. Job talks, and then one of his friends responds, followed by Job, and then another friend, and then Job, and then another friend. And that goes on 3 different times. It repeats itself. The friends' arguments are basically the same, though they get a little bit more accusatory as you go along. Eliphaz, the oldest of the friends, begins. He says that his response is a personal response based on life experiences, things that he has learned. Eliphaz says that the disasters that have come on Job and Job's reactions to them prove that Job is hiding shame or guilt that must be confronted. Eliphaz holds that in God's universe, you get what you deserve. You reap what you sow, a tit for a tat. Being good will bring good things, and adversely, being bad will mean that you will be punished. Therefore, Job must be guilty of something. Job responds simply and says, I don't agree. I'm innocent. The second friend, Bildad, adds his arguments to those of Eliphaz. Basically, he agrees with what Eliphaz has said and adds even more possibilities as to why these bad things happen. Bildad was a legalist. His addition to Job's situation was that if Job was innocent, then his children must have been guilty. When Zophar's turn comes, he shows no mercy and says that God is actually giving Job less than he deserves. He accuses Job of being a hypocrite, which is the worst type of human. The friends did say some true things during their ramblings, but they also said things that were not true, and generally speaking, they were of absolutely no help to Job. There are many people today who are like Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When someone feels compelled to explain every problem, someone who has an answer to every question or a formula for solving difficulties, they are showing little mercy and care for the person who is actually going through suffering. You do not heal a broken heart with logic. You heal a broken heart with love. One of the main problems with Job's friends was that they had no understanding of the theology of innocent suffering. Why would God permit innocent people to suffer? For Job's friends, this whole concept was just missing. They would not be able to explain the situation of Joseph being sold into slavery, of Daniel being thrown into the lion's den, or of the 5 missionaries who were martyred in Ecuador at the hand of the Auca Indians, or the prime example of Jesus dying on the cross. These were all for the glory of God. For Job's friends, if Job wasn't a sinner being punished for his sins, then this could also happen to them. If obedience to God was not a guarantee of health and wealth, then they could also suffer what Job was going through. And so they showed no mercy in their arguments against how Job was defending himself, because they needed to defend their own belief system. But Job holds his ground and insists on his innocence. He says he needs to plead his situation directly with God. Chapter 32. We go to the fourth friend, Elihu. Elihu takes 6 chapters to explain the character of God. He does not try to prove that Job was a sinner, but to prove that Job's view of God was wrong. Elihu introduces the idea that God sometimes sends suffering not to punish for sins, but to keep one from sinning and to make us better people. Both the Apostle Paul and the author to Hebrews affirm this position in their own writings. Elihu wanted Job to consider the greatness of God and the wonders of nature and to realize how little Job really knew about God and his working in the world. Elihu agreed that Job was not a sinner that his other friends thought him to be, But he argued that Job did have a problem with his attitude. Job was slowly showing himself to be defiant and self-righteous. And this was what God is addressing in the next chapters 38 to 41. God addresses Job directly out of a storm, showing his power and might. He starts off by asking, "Who are you that I should concern myself with you? Are you an equal?" Job asked God about all the creation of the universe, and Job realizes that his capacity to understand was lacking. Job was in some ways, after all, accusing God of being wrong in attacking him or of ignoring him. But by the time chapter 42 comes, Job realizes that he does not have the knowledge to be able to stand in judgment of God, and he repents. He just says, "I'm wrong." Job had thought that God was being unjust, but now he realizes that he cannot even begin to understand God, and that God is truly just in all of his dealings, even if he doesn't understand. God then tells Job's 3 friends that they need to have Job pray for them because they were all wrong in what and how they accused Job. There are some people who think that this book should have stopped with Job praying for his friends, verse 9 of chapter 42. And why is that? Because the last part of Job, verses 10 and following of chapter 42, we see God restoring Job to his previous positions, actually giving him twice what he had before. By God doing this, it makes some people think that this just proves that if you do good, you will be rewarded. This is almost like prosperity gospel teaching. But there are 2 things I want to say about this. First, Job went through this entire story without any knowledge that he was going to receive anything back from God. He repented. He was faithful to God. He did not curse God. He kept his integrity. He was willing and not expecting to receive anything back. So the fact that God did this for Job is really after the fact. Secondly, God is God. His time frame is not like our time frame. He has said that he will destroy evil, that he will comfort the righteous, that he will reward those who suffer for his sake, that he will defeat and punish Satan. And so this shows that God is God, and really, aren't we happy about that? In conclusion, I want to wrap up with just a few more thoughts. You may not understand your suffering, and that is okay. A cursory glance seems to not give us a reason for Job's suffering. Why did God permit Satan to have all of Job's wealth taken away? Why were all 10 of his children killed? Why did he get a terrible disease? The answer to all these questions, I believe, is really given to us in the first 2 chapters. Remember the meetings that God had with the sons of God, and Satan was also there. God asked Satan if he had found anyone like Job on the earth. Satan knew what Job was like, and he accused God of protecting Job from all evil and bad things. Satan was thinking that if bad things could happen to Job, that Job would end up cursing God. So God permitted Satan to test Job, and that resulted in Job losing his wealth, his children, and his health. But Job never turned against God. God allowed this to show Satan that someone could love and worship God just because of who God was and is, and not because of all the worldly blessings that you could get out of it. People, when we are being tested, when we are going through trials and hardships, we need to remember that we are really in a spiritual battle. Satan is there trying to get us to turn away from God, to distrust God, and he will do all sorts of evil things to get us to weaken our commitment to God, to question, does he even exist? The second reason that God permits us to be tempted and to have difficulties is for our own spiritual growth. When bad things happen to us, yes, it is easy to ask God why. But instead of focusing on asking why something is happening, we should be asking, what can I learn going through this to make me more like Christ? God, I don't understand what you are doing or why you're doing it, but I trust you and love you. Teach me through this to love you more and to deepen my faith. Going through trials and difficulties is for your own spiritual growth. But it is also important to realize that it is also a testimony to others. Others are watching you, seeing how you handle your problems. The last thing I want to share with you about Job and his loss is that even in the midst of all of his sorrow and pain from having lost his wealth, his family, and his health, Job shares a tremendous prophecy that is a real blessing and a promise for us today. Look with me, if you will, to chapter 19. Chapter 19, Job chapter 19, verse 25. This is in the middle of one of Job's responses. Job chapter 19, verse 25. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my sin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. Job is talking about the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of the world, who is coming to the world for all of mankind. And at the very end of time, Christ will still be standing as the ruler of the world. And even though Job's flesh and skin will long be destroyed by that time, he too will be restored and will see God in the final resurrection. In the midst of all Job's suffering, he knew that God, his Redeemer, was still there. This verse inspired Handel, and it became one of the best-known songs in the oratorio, The Messiah. I know that my Redeemer liveth. Absolutely amazing. What a promise. He is there through it all. He is there. So how do you react when the going gets tough and rough? When you are hit with trials and difficulties? Have you been training for this? Practicing for the real thing? How has your soil been prepared? When you receive the seed, will you produce a harvest, or will the stones and thorns keep you from being productive? In this life, you will have difficulties. You will have problems. When you are going through a dark tunnel, it is not the time to jump off of the train. Stay on the train. Trust the conductor. You need to prepare for these difficult times, because when they come, and they will, it's too late to start your training. Is your soil ready? Is it unpacked, without stones, without weeds? Let him who has ears to hear, hear.